Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is carrying on the series where we're looking at in-depth view of some of the forward drive modifications I brought up in my previous video. We're looking specifically on this one at Diff Lockers because it is such a long and complex subject. I've just said it alone rather than combining it with the bull bar as a modification that we're going to look at. So we're just going to focus on that because I wanted to really touch on the basics first, just in case, and then be allowed to elaborate further so you understand why we want Diff Lockers, or more so understand them better and what use they have when it comes to forward driving. First up, standard disclaimer. I'm not going to have to read this again. If you really want to, you can just pause and read it for your own thoughts, but I think we've gone through it enough by now. Moving straight along, this is just a bit of housekeeping from the last video. One of the members brought up something, so I thought it'd be great to include it in this video to clarify a few points. Firstly, quick was on the where I mentioned how corrugation with the our gravel roads here can cause a lot of issues with your shocks and wear them out very quickly, or at least heat them up much faster. I forgot to mention, and it was a valid point, which I do anyway, but don't remember mentioning it. It's always a good idea to deflate your tyre slightly when you are going over a lot of corrugation, as it helps take some of the strain off your shock. The other one was what we call upper control arms. These are important for independent front suspension upgrade lift kits, because when you upgrade your suspension and your lift kits on the independent front suspension, you can create issues due to the complexity of the parts involved with an IFS. With the pivoting of the suspension arms, the ball joint operating angles can knock things out of alignment, cause your wheels not to sit in the correct alignment that you want them to be. So a good aftermarket UCA can alleviate a lot of these issues and keep your wheel within that alignment. Some also can be adjustable depending on the manufacturer that you go with. They can provide better clearance, give you better wheel travel, provide better off-road performance and handling on-road, while stopping some of the bad wear and tear as a result of not implementing this at all. So consider your specs from the manufacturer and the Australian rules to make sure you're still fitting within the guidelines. So that's why it's always good to check with your manufacturer to make sure they're complying with the conditions, so you're not voiding your warranty and you're not making your car unroadworthy technically. So check into that before you upgrade those sorts of things. So moving on to our topic for today, which is diffs. So just going to cover the basics first and then move into diff lockers and some types and variations and how they work and pros and cons, etc. So try not to teach us hackies, but for clarity, diffs or differentials essentially is the device at the back that allows you to negotiate your turns, so that as you can see in the picture, when you turn, the outside wheel has to travel further than the inside wheel, so you need one to spin faster while the other one spins less. So they came up with what was called an open one, and then later the limited slip diff. So they allow the wheels to turn independently of each other. And they can also be utilised in traction control if it's equipped as part of your vehicle. So open diffs were they're most commonly found in normal vehicles. They allow the wheels there to rotate at different speeds when cornering. They were the original solution to that problem. So they allow those wheels to turn independently. They prevent the wheel hop, vehicle instability, and excessive tyre wear that would happen if you didn't have one, although they don't work as well on uneven or slippery surfaces because engine torque is transmitted basically to the wheel with the least resistance, i.e. the one with the least amount of traction. And if the wheel is off the ground or on some sort of slippery surface, it will just continue to spin freely altogether and you won't move at all. Limited slip diffs, LSDs, utilize some means of partially reducing but not totally eliminating that wheel spin. So it's an improvement on the open system. They use varying methods to transfer torque to the wheel with the traction, while limiting the slip off on the wheel with the least traction. So it's what we call torque sensing. They're like the open system where the wheels can operate and rotate at different speeds. However, torque's not always balanced between the wheels, so this allows the wheel with traction to receive more torque to keep it moving. It's considered the diff's considered biased towards torque, so it gives it to the higher traction to that tire, so the torque to the one with the higher traction, and the amount of traction variation the diff can shift between the wheels. It works well for cornering and on normal roads, but can become a problem when you come off-road, as if one wheel becomes lost or loses traction altogether. It will continue to transfer its power to that wheel because it thinks that there's a lack of traction. It needs to continue that spin, and thus it just perpetuates the problem and you won't go anywhere. One wheel will spin much faster than the other one, so we don't want that to happen. So that's where where lockers come into it. So lockers, in the essential simple terms, they lock the axles mechanically together, forcing traction between both wheels equally, so they rotate at the same speed. And they're supposed to always distribute that equal amount of torque to both wheels. And I put that in underlining because always and equal it should be. Whether it happens or not all the time can vary in my experience. So there is a difference between left and right diff is always the RPM different between the right and left is always proportional. So when you're off-roading, it's great if one wheel is either off the ground or lacks traction on one side. The locker will still allow traction to go through both wheels equally, so that the wheel that does have some traction can continue to maneuver and move you forward. So it basically guarantees equal speed across all four wheels if you have all lockers. So a good heavy-duty four-wheel drive generally has three types of lockers, these being central, front, and rear. Like in the picture here. So a central one, gone too far. Central one means it transfers 50 to the front and 50 to the rear. I think I have another slide that covers that in a bit, so I won't go too much more into that. But it's best to learn about your lockers on your car before you go around using it, because improper use of lockers fitted from a factory can actually affect your vehicle or cause it some damage, particularly if you're on the road, and can make handling or maneuvering difficult. Ideally, diffs should be locked before traction is locked and you have a lot of wheel spin, and then immediately switched off after you finish with it. That's best practice, but it doesn't always happen that way. So sometimes you might need to lock it after the fact, but it's not always ideal. But if you know you're going to go up a steep slope where the traction might be needed, it's best to turn it on rather than not have it on. So as I mentioned, great for off-roading. When you're lacking on one wheel, you still got traction on the other. They guarantee that equal wheels speed. As mentioned, with the central one, it sends 50% to the front, 50% to the rear. And if you have front and rear lockers, it sends 50% to either end of the axle, so 50% of that would go to the left and 50% of that would go to the right wheel, and same with the front. This increases your forward drive capacity exponentially when it's utilized correctly and turned off when not needed, so it doesn't impact your turning or your steering. So a locker can also be manual or automatic. Manuals would be like the ARB air lockers or electromagnetic types of lockers, and the automatics can be ones like No Spins, Detroit Locker, or the Locker brand. I don't see a lot of the automatic versions from my experience, but they're out there. There's a lot of cons though with them. Drivable selectable lockers use a push button, much like my Triton has one, where you utilizes electromagnetic assembly to actuate the engagement collar, which in turn locks the axle. Air lockers use a vacuum diaphragm that actuates the clutch which lock the axles. Which looks like the axles and locks them. There are a few installation complexities that go along with this, as well as the cost of having to have an onboard air compressor and airline pumping put in to make this effective. So it does cost a bit to get them implemented. Automatic ones require no driver input at all, and they lock together when torque's applied. So varying brands work differently. For example, the one like the M locker operates like an open diff, but it locks upon loss of traction when it's under roughly about 45 kilometers, and then unlocks again when conditions are suitable. The Detroit locker version is normally locked, but automatically unlocks during turns and relocks again when conditions allow. But in my opinion, manual lockers are much significantly better. They can generally be engaged while you're moving, as long as you're moving slowly. They should be used proactively, so before wheel spin or situations like that occur. And they should preferably be used briefly and strategically when needed, just as so you can maximize your steering capability and not wear out your system. Some of the advantages, so you get that instant traction capabilities, can be turned on and off as needed, that being the selectable ones. If you went with the air lockers, you get compressed air on board as part of that system, which you can use for other means. You can lock one or both independently, so you don't have to lock. You can lock your rear by itself, you can lock the front by itself, you can lock both of them, you can lock the central and all three of them. So there's varyings there. Some disadvantages, there's noise issues. That's generally the automatics. I've never seen them with the selectable. I haven't noticed it. They're very expensive though, and they do require ongoing maintenance, and they can affect your vehicle steering characteristics. Front and rear diff lockers. So front and rear, they can depend on the type of vehicle you have and what equipment's already installed on it as to what you choose to do first, or if at all. So if you've got a factory rear, there's no point even bother putting one in. But if you have a factory open diff, it's best to focus on a rear diff locker first. If you've got a limited slip diff in the back, then you're best focused on a front differential locker, because it's more suitable for the diverse range of situations until you can perhaps get a rear diff locker. The rear diff locker is the better way to go for value for money, as you get more flex and you get more contact with the ground. Fronts are great when it comes to climbing hills and pulling yourself out of big ditches or over rock ledges. But as mentioned, the cons with it is that restriction with the steering ability. So you'll have to turn it off as soon as you finish getting through whatever obstacle you have. Having all three of those increases your forward drive capabilities. I mean, 3 is front, rear, and central. Increases your forward drive capabilities quite substantially. So I always go for quality, as issues can be caused if you choose a bad one. You can actually make the problem worse, and it can actually end up costing you more than the diff locker itself if you get a bad one. Brand one, that is. Some of the brand names out there are like the E-Locker, TJM Pro Locker, ARB's Air Locker, and the Locker automatic version. So in conclusion, I've smashed this out as quick as I can, so I didn't keep it too long, but hopefully it gives you a good understanding of some diffs. From there, some basic function and main types that are important to focus on when you're looking at your forward drive, and the way that lockers work and how great they can be to your usage when it comes to forward driving when used correctly, and how they can actually really help you get out of a lot of situations by utilizing these if you have them. Get an idea of the differences between the types, between front, rear, and central, what's benefits and disadvantages you get out of them. Same with automatic and manual diffs, the advantages and disadvantages with that, and hopefully help clarify diff lockers in general and give you something to consider when it comes to looking at your vehicle and deciding whether you need one put in and where to put one in. But in my personal opinion, I've found having a rear diff locker has been really helpful for me in a number of scenarios. So getting a front diff locker is on my agenda to have done soon whenever the funds is available, because they're not that cheap. It's a big list of things to have added to my vehicle, but this is one of them. So hopefully that's of some use to you guys. Appreciate you listening. Subscribe some more, and we've got some more content coming out soon again. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.